A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corin. So one of the things I love about this podcast, and sometimes I have to say, drive myself a bit nuts when I'm trying to do other things, is every time I listen to one of your always engaging episodes, another question pops into my mind. And I say I better ask it now because I'm going to forget what it was. And these are all the little shower thoughts that I specifically want to make sure that I send in for episodes, because they're the weird little thoughts we have now and again that do tend to drift in and out of our mind, and I think rarely get recorded. So here's one, Herman and Corin. We talked about infant CPR and how you call for help, when you call for help. And you mentioned, it made me think about how that actually works. So we see on mobile phones, cell phones, smartphones, that there's an option to call for emergency services. And I've always wondered how it is that works, even if you don't have a cellular subscription. If you find yourself in another country, what I've noticed is that the emergency service numbers, like the number for fire, police, etc., are often programmed into the phone, or you actually inherit them from a geography, which is really important if you have a tourist from another part of the world who expects that you're going to call 999 for emergency services. And in Israel, it's 101. So two questions in one, really. Number one, this process of sharing emergency contact number, propagating it to devices that can call. How does that work exactly? Because we're always trying to understand the nuts and bolts behind this cool and interesting and very important tech on this podcast. That's question one. And question two is how this works with carriers. Because usually a carrier says your phone might pick up a reception, but your SIM card has something called an IMEI, which identifies you. And usually the carriers say, hang on, you don't have a roaming plan, or you don't have an active subscription. We're not going to let you make a call. So this must be prearranged with all the mobile carriers, that there's a bypass mechanism. And I'm just curious as to how that works. Is it something that all the mobile operators, the GSM operators, actually have to opt into for the common good? I presume so. I mean, I hope that they would do so anyway. But it's an important topic, I think, because even if you are on a prepay or a contract, you definitely imagine a situation in which you didn't set up the roaming correctly or something like that. And we don't want that to make the difference between someone who can and can't call emergency services. Herman and Corin, over to you two.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and I am here with my brother to dive into some of the most fascinating corners of technology and human systems. It is February 26, 2026, and the world feels like it is moving faster than ever, but some of the most important tech is the stuff that stays hidden until the worst day of your life.
Herman Poppleberry here, at your service. Today's prompt comes from Daniel, and it is a deep dive into the invisible safety net that follows us everywhere we go with our smartphones. Specifically, Daniel wants to know how emergency services work across borders, how they function without active subscriptions, and if there is a universal bypass that makes it all possible.
It is a great topic, and it is actually quite timely. Daniel mentioned infant CPR in his audio prompt, and with little Ezra being so young, you can really see why these fail-safes are on his mind. When you are a parent, or really just a human being in a crisis, you need the technology to just work. You do not want to be worrying about roaming agreements, whether your SIM card is active, or if you have enough credit on a prepaid plan. You just need that call to connect.
There is a profound piece of engineering and international diplomacy happening behind the scenes every time you see that emergency call button on your lock screen. It is one of those things we take for granted until we are in a situation where we need it. It is a combination of hardware, software, and global treaties that have been refined over decades.
So, let us break this down for Daniel and the rest of our listeners. He has two main questions. First, How does the phone know which number to call when you are in a different country? And second, how do carriers facilitate those calls, even if you do not have a valid plan or even an SIM card in the device?
It is a layered answer, but we should start with the most fundamental part, which is the hardware and the global standards that govern mobile communications. Everything we are talking about is defined by a body called the Third Generation Partnership Project, or 3GPP. They are the ones who write the technical specifications for GSM, UMTS, LTE, 5G, and now the 5G advanced standards we are seeing in 2026.
Right, so these are not just suggestions. These are the rules of the road for every phone manufacturer and every network operator on the planet. If you want to build a phone or run a network, you have to play by these rules.
Precisely. Specifically, there is a technical specification called TS22.101. It outlines the requirements for service aspects and service principles. One of the most critical sections in that document is about emergency calls. It mandates that any mobile station, which is just the technical term for your phone, must be able to initiate an emergency call without a valid subscription and without an SIM or USIM being present. This is a hard requirement. If a device cannot do this, it cannot be certified to run on the network.
That is the part that always feels a bit like magic. If I take my phone, pull out the SIM card, and turn it on, it says no service or emergency calls only. But how is it actually communicating if it is not logged into a network? Usually, the network needs to know who I am, so it can bill me, or at least verify I am a customer.
This is where we get into the concept of limited service mode. Normally, when you turn on your phone, it looks for its home network. It scans the frequencies it is programmed to use. If it cannot find its home network, it looks for a roaming partner. It goes through a complex handshake process where it identifies itself using an IMSI, which is the International Mobile Subscriber Identity stored on your SIM. The network checks its database, talks to your home carrier, asks if you have paid your bill, and then it lets you on.
But in an emergency, that whole authentication handshake is bypassed, right? The network basically stops asking for your ID card.
Your phone is constantly scanning the radio environment. Even if it cannot authenticate with a tower, it still knows the towers are there. It can hear the broadcast signals from every carrier in range. When you hit that emergency button, the phone essentially sends a special kind of signal called an emergency setup message. It tells the nearest tower, regardless of who owns it, that it needs an immediate connection for an emergency. This is what we call null authentication. The network sees the emergency flag and says, "I do not care who you are, I am opening a pipe for you right now."
And the tower is legally and technically obligated to accept that request. They cannot just say, "Sorry, you are not a T-Mobile customer, go find a Verizon tower."
It is. It is built into the very first steps of the connection process. In the radio resource layer, there is something called the Random Access Channel, or RACH. When a phone wants to talk to a tower, it sends a little burst of data on this channel. Normally, that burst includes information about who the phone is. But for an emergency call, it uses a specific establishment clause that identifies it as an emergency. The network sees that flag and prioritizes it above everything else. In fact, in 2026, with the latest 5G advanced protocols, this process is faster than ever, often connecting in under a second.
I imagine this is why you might see emergency calls only on your screen when you are in a dead zone for your specific carrier, but another carrier has a tower nearby. Your phone is basically telling you, "I am not connected to our network, but I can see a lifeline."
That is exactly it. Your phone is basically saying, "I cannot get you on your carrier, but I can see another one, and I am ready to jump on their frequency the second you need me to." It is a form of forced roaming that is free and universal.
Now, let us talk about the numbers themselves. Daniel mentioned that in Israel the emergency number is 101 for medical, whereas in Ireland or the United Kingdom it is 999, and in the United States it is 911. How does the phone know which one to dial when you press that emergency button? It seems like a huge database to keep updated.
This is the propagation part of Daniel's question, and it is a mix of 3 different mechanisms working together to ensure the phone is never guessing. The first one is the SIM card itself. Every SIM card has a small file on it called the EFECC, which stands for Elementary File Emergency Call Codes. It is a hard-coded list of numbers that the phone should treat as emergencies, like 911 or 112. This is the fallback of the fallback.
But that list is static, right? If I bought my SIM card in New York 5 years ago, it probably does not know the local numbers for a small town in rural Japan.
Right, that is just the baseline. The second mechanism is the phone's operating system. Both Apple and Google maintain extensive, cloud-updated databases of emergency numbers for every country and territory in the world. When your phone realizes it is in a new country, which it knows based on the Mobile Country Code, or MCC, it receives from the cell towers, it updates its internal list of what qualifies as an emergency number. The MCC is a 3-digit code that is part of the very first signal a tower broadcasts.
So the phone hears a signal from a tower that says, "Hey, you are in country code 425, which is Israel." And the OS says, "Okay, I have checked my database, and in this zone, 100, 101, and 102 are all emergency triggers."
And the third, and perhaps most robust mechanism, is the network signaling itself. When a phone connects to a tower, even in that limited service mode, the tower can actually broadcast a list of local emergency numbers to the device. This is part of the system information blocks, specifically SIB1 and SIB2, that are sent out over the air. So even if your phone is old and its internal database is out of date, or you have no SIM card at all, the tower can tell it, hey, if someone dials these specific digits, treat it as an emergency call.
That is really clever. It means the system is self-healing. If a country decides to change its emergency number tomorrow, they do not have to wait for every phone on Earth to get a software update. They just update the configuration at the cell towers, and every phone that pings those towers is instantly informed.
Precisely. And this is why, in many cases, if you dial 911 while you are in Europe, the phone will recognize that you are trying to make an emergency call and will automatically reroute it to 112, which is the European standard. The phone is smart enough to map your intent to the local reality. It does not just try to dial 911 over the European network, it translates the request.
You mentioned 112. We should probably explain why that number is so special. It is like the secret handshake of the telecom world.
Oh, definitely. 112 is the international gold standard. It was established by the European Telecommunications Standards Institute and has since been adopted by the 3GPP as the universal emergency number. Every GSM-compatible phone is programmed to recognize 112 as an emergency call regardless of where it is in the world, what is on the SIM card, or even if there is no SIM card at all.
It is like a universal key for the global phone system. That is the first of our 2 allowed analogies, by the way. It opens the door to emergency services no matter which lock is on the door. If you are ever panicked and cannot remember the local number, 112 is the safest bet globally.
I like that. It really is a universal key. Even if the local number is different, 112 is almost always supported in the background. If you are ever in a foreign country and you do not know the local number, dialing 112 is your best bet because the hardware itself is designed to treat those 3 digits with the highest priority. In many countries, dialing 112 will even work on landlines, though that is becoming less common as we move toward all IP systems.
I want to go back to the idea of a universal bypass. Daniel asked if there is a mechanism that all operators are required to implement. It sounds like the bypass is not just a single switch, but a series of protocols that ignore the usual barriers. It is more like a high-priority lane on a highway that never closes.
Right. It is not a secret back door. It is an open, standardized front door that is never locked. There are several layers to this bypass. First, as we mentioned, is the unauthenticated access. The network must allow the device to establish a radio connection without checking for an IMSI or a valid subscription. This is actually a challenge for carriers because it opens them up to potential denial of service attacks, but the humanitarian requirement overrides the security concern.
Second is the priority. In a congested network, like during a large-scale disaster or even just a crowded concert, emergency calls are moved to the front of the line. If a cell tower is at 100% capacity, it will actually drop a non-emergency call to make room for an emergency one.
That is a critical point. It is called preemption. The network can literally kick a teenager off a social media stream to ensure that an emergency call can go through. This is governed by something called the Allocation and Retention Priority, or ARP. Emergency calls are assigned the highest possible ARP level. This is mandated by law in most jurisdictions, including under the Federal Communications Commission rules in the United States and similar regulations in Israel and the European Union.
And the third layer of the bypass is the routing. Normally, a call has to go through a whole series of checks, billing systems, and home location registers. For an emergency call, all of that is skipped. The call is routed directly from the mobile switching center to the nearest public safety answering point, or PSAP.
That is a great term to know. The PSAP is the actual dispatch center where the emergency operator is sitting. The goal of the entire mobile network during an emergency call is to get the voice and location data to the PSAP as fast as humanly possible, with the fewest number of hops. In the old days, this was done over analog trunks, but today it is almost all IP-based, which allows for much more data to be sent along with the voice.
We actually touched on the reliability of these systems back in episode 745 when we talked about cell broadcast technology. It is a similar philosophy. You want a system that works when everything else is failing or overloaded. It is about the lowest common denominator.
It is. And just like cell broadcast, emergency calling is designed to be as simple and robust as possible. It uses the most stable signaling methods. For example, even on a high-speed 5G network, an emergency call might be handled using older, more stable signaling methods if the newer ones are experiencing any issues. The phone and the network will keep downgrading the technology from 5G to LTE to even older standards if they are available until a connection is made.
Let us talk about the SIM-less situation again. If I do not have an SIM card, the network does not know who I am. But they still need to know where I am, right? How does location data work when you are in this unauthenticated state? In the past, they just knew which tower you were hitting, but that is not very precise if you are in a forest or a high-rise.
That is a huge part of the modern emergency system, often called E911 in North America or Advanced Mobile Location, or AML, in Europe and many other parts of the world. When you make an emergency call, your phone does not just send voice. It triggers a high-priority location scan. It uses everything it has: GPS, Wi-Fi access points, Bluetooth beacons, and cell tower triangulation.
Even if I have location services turned off on my phone for privacy reasons, I know some people are very strict about that.
Yes. The emergency call bypasses your privacy settings. The 3GPP standards and local laws require that the phone provides the best available location data to the emergency operator. In fact, on many phones, you will see a little icon appear during the call that says Emergency Location Service is active. This is a temporary override. Once the call ends, the phone goes back to your preferred privacy settings.
It is fascinating because it is one of the few times where the user's explicit settings are overridden by the system. But it makes sense. If you are unconscious or in shock, you cannot exactly navigate through your settings to turn on GPS. The system assumes that if you are calling for help, you want to be found.
And the network side of that is just as important. The carrier can use the timing and strength of your signal at multiple towers to calculate your position. This is called Observed Time Difference of Arrival, or OTD-OA. It is not as accurate as GPS, but it works even if you are deep inside a building where GPS signals cannot reach. In 2026, we also have Z-axis location, which tells the dispatcher what floor of a building you are on by using the barometric pressure sensor in your phone.
Daniel also asked about roaming. If you are in a country where your carrier has no agreement, the phone still works. But what happens on the carrier side? Do they just eat the cost of that call? It seems like there would be a lot of accounting involved.
Pretty much. The cost of an emergency call is negligible compared to the regulatory and social cost of not connecting it. Most countries have laws that forbid carriers from charging for emergency calls anyway. It is considered a public service. In the grand scheme of things, the amount of bandwidth used by emergency calls is tiny. There is no inter-carrier billing for emergency calls. It is just accepted as part of the cost of doing business.
It is basically a mutual aid agreement between all the telecom companies in the world. I will carry your users' emergencies if you carry mine. It is one of the few areas where global corporations act with total cooperation.
That is a good way to put it. It is a global pact. And it is not just about the big carriers. Even small regional providers have to follow these rules. If they want a license to operate a radio frequency, they have to agree to these terms. In the United States, the FCC is very strict about this. If a carrier fails to connect emergency calls properly, they face massive fines and can even lose their license.
I wonder about the edge cases. What happens if you are in a place with absolutely no cell coverage from any provider? We have seen some huge developments with satellite connectivity and smartphones over the last couple of years. Does that follow the same rules?
It is starting to. Apple and now almost all major Android manufacturers have introduced satellite SOS features. These use a different set of protocols because talking to a satellite is much harder than talking to a tower, but the goal is the same. It uses a low bandwidth, high priority message that includes your location, your medical ID, and a brief description of the emergency. By 2026, we are even seeing supplemental coverage from space, where your regular phone can connect to a satellite as if it were a cell tower.
And those satellite providers are also working with emergency dispatchers to make sure those messages get to the right PSAP. It is not just a text to a private company.
Right. They often use a relay center. The satellite picks up the signal, beams it down to a ground station, which then sends it to a dedicated emergency response center. That center then calls the local authorities on your behalf. It is like a high-tech version of the old emergency flares. That is my second analogy for the day. It is a signal fire that can be seen from space.
We are hitting our limit on analogies, but those were two very good ones. It really helps to visualize how these systems are layered. You have the universal key of the protocol and the signal fire of the hardware. It is about redundancy.
Now, there is one interesting detail about Israel that Daniel might find interesting given he lives there. Israel uses a multi-tier emergency number system. 100 for police, 101 for medics, and 102 for fire. Most modern phones in Israel will show you a menu when you hit the emergency button, asking which service you need. This is a great example of the OS being aware of the local context.
Oh, that is interesting. So the OS is actually providing a custom UI based on the local country code. It is not just a dialer, it is a triage tool.
Instead of just dialing one number and having a dispatcher route you, the phone lets you go directly to the department you need. But if you were to just dial 112, it would still work. It would likely go to a central police dispatcher who would then transfer you. The system is designed to be flexible.
It is amazing how much thought has gone into the human factors here. The system is designed to be idiot-proof and stress-proof. When you are in a crisis, your brain does not work the same way.
It has to be. In a true emergency, your cognitive load is through the roof. You are not thinking clearly. The technology has to pick up the slack. This is why things like the emergency button on the lock screen exist. You do not even have to unlock the phone, remember your PIN, or use Face ID. You just need to be able to tap that one button.
We talked about emergency dispatchers in episode 542, and they mentioned how much they rely on the data that comes through with the call. The fact that the phone can send your location and even your medical ID information automatically is a huge leap forward from the days of landlines. Back then, they just had an address tied to a wire.
It really is. With landlines, the location was tied to the physical jack in the wall. With mobile, it is a moving target. The technology we have been discussing is what makes that moving target findable. And with Advanced Mobile Location, or AML, the phone actually sends an invisible SMS to the emergency services with your precise GPS coordinates the moment the call is initiated. You do not even see the text being sent.
I want to touch on something Daniel mentioned about being in another country and worrying about the number. He said he better ask now because he will forget. It is funny because the phone is designed so that he does not have to remember. If he is in Ireland and dials 999, it works. If he is in Israel and dials 101, it works. If he is in the United States and dials 911, it works. And in almost all of those places, if he dials 112, it also works.
It is a testament to the success of global standardization. We often complain about how slow standards bodies are, and the 3GPP is famously bureaucratic, but this is the result of that bureaucracy. A world where you can take a piece of glass and metal from one side of the planet to the other, and it still knows how to save your life. It is a silent triumph of international cooperation.
Is there any situation where this fails? I mean, are there countries that do not follow these 3GPP standards? Or maybe places where the infrastructure is just too old?
Very few. Even countries with their own internal standards, like China with their specific flavors of LTE and 5G, still adhere to the fundamental emergency calling principles. They have to, if they want their citizens to be able to use their phones abroad, and if they want tourists to be able to use their phones there. The roaming economy is too big to ignore, and the humanitarian cost of a tourist dying because they could not call for help is a PR nightmare no country wants.
What about the hardware itself? Is it possible for a phone to be so old that it does not support these features? We are in 2026 now. Surely the old 2G and 3G phones are mostly gone.
That is actually a real concern. As carriers turn off their 2G and 3G networks to make room for more 5G and 6G spectrum, older phones that do not support voice over LTE or VoLTE might find themselves unable to make calls at all. In an emergency, if there is no LTE signal and the old 2G tower has been dismantled, that phone is just a brick. This is why many countries have mandatory upgrade programs for people using very old devices.
We covered the ESIM revolution in episode 543, and that is another layer of this. As we move away from physical SIM cards, the authentication process becomes even more software-defined. But the emergency bypass remains a hardware-level requirement in the baseband processor.
Whether it is a physical card or an ESIM, the baseband processor in your phone, which is the separate little computer that handles the radio, still has that emergency instruction set burned into its memory. It is the most protected part of the phone's code. It operates independently of the main operating system in many ways.
It is almost like a lizard brain for the smartphone. It does not need to know how to run apps, take photos, or browse the web to know how to scream for help. It is the primal instinct of the device.
That is a great way to think about it. It is the primal instinct. Even if the main processor is frozen or an app has crashed the UI, the baseband is often still alive and capable of making that emergency connection.
So, to summarize for Daniel, the propagation happens through a mix of hard-coded lists on the SIM, databases in the phone's operating system that update based on the mobile country code, and live information broadcast by the cell towers themselves via system information blocks. The bypass is a mandatory, unauthenticated priority channel built into the global cellular standards that allows any phone to talk to any tower for the purpose of an emergency.
And it is all backed by international law and strict technical specifications like TS22.101. It is one of the most successful examples of global cooperation in human history, even if most people never have to think about it. It is a system that assumes the best of humanity, that we should all help each other in a crisis, and builds that assumption into the very silicon of our devices.
It is a bit of a relief, honestly, knowing that all that complexity is working in your favor. Especially for someone like Daniel, who's navigating life in a different country with a young family. It is one less thing to worry about. You can focus on learning CPR and being prepared, knowing the tech has your back.
Definitely. And it is a great reminder of why these technical standards matter. They are not just about making sure our apps run fast or our videos are high definition. They are about the fundamental safety of the network. They are the digital equivalent of building codes and fire escapes.
I think we have covered the core of Daniel's question, but there are a few practical takeaways for our listeners. First, always know that 112 is the universal number. If you're traveling and you forget the local code, just dial 112. It is programmed into the hardware to work.
Second, make sure your medical ID is set up on your phone. On both iPhone and Android, you can enter your blood type, allergies, and emergency contacts. This information can be accessed by first responders even if your phone is locked, and in many cases, it is set digitally to the dispatcher during an emergency call via the E911 or AML protocols.
That is such an important tip. It takes 2 minutes to set up and could save your life. And third, if you are ever in a situation where you have no cell service at all, remember that your phone is still trying. Keep it in a place where it has a clear view of the sky if you are trying to use those newer satellite features. Do not give up just because you see no bars.
And do not assume that just because your carrier says no service, you cannot make an emergency call. If you see the words emergency calls only, it means your phone has found a different carrier's tower and is ready to use it. It is a green light, not a red one.
This has been a really deep dive into a system that is usually invisible. I love these kinds of prompts from Daniel because they force us to look at the plumbing of our digital lives. It is easy to forget how much work goes into making things look simple.
Me too. It is easy to get caught up in the latest AI features or the newest screen technology, but the real engineering marvels are often the ones that have been quietly working in the background for decades, waiting for the one moment they are needed.
Well, I think that wraps it up for this topic. We have looked at the hardware, the software, and the international agreements that keep us safe. It is a robust system, but as always, it is good to have a backup plan. Technology is great, but human knowledge is the ultimate failsafe.
Agreed. And if you found this interesting, I highly recommend checking out episode 457, where we talked about the pager paradox. It is a great companion piece to this discussion about reliable emergency communication and why some old tech just won't die.
That is a great suggestion. Pagers are still used in hospitals for a reason, and it ties back to that same philosophy of simple, robust technology that works when the network is screaming. Well, thank you all for listening to My Weird Prompts. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. If you are enjoying the show, we would love it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or a rating on Spotify. It really does help other people find the show and helps us keep doing this. We are aiming for 1,000 reviews by the end of the year, so every bit helps.
It really does. And a big thanks to Daniel for sending in this prompt. It was a great one to explore, and we hope it gives you some peace of mind over there in Israel.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit our website at myweirdprompts.com to search our full archive of over 800 episodes, or to send us a message through our contact form. We have a lot of deep dives into cellular tech if that is your thing.
And if you have a weird prompt of your own, you can email us at show@myweirdprompts.com. We would love to hear from you. No prompt is too technical or too strange.
Our show music was generated with Suno. It has been a pleasure as always, Herman.
Likewise, Corn.
Until next time, stay curious.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We shake.